Hello everyone! If you enjoy my channel, please support me with one like, one subscribe, and one share.
Why one pair of jeans changed my life. Have you ever looked at something as ordinary as a pair of blue jeans and wondered why millions of Americans wear them almost every day? I used to think jeans were just comfortable pants. Nothing more. But one unexpected afternoon in the United States completely changed my mind. What began as a simple shopping trip slowly uncovered a story about love, family, freedom, and one quiet secret that almost changed my marriage forever. If you have ever felt invisible, misunderstood, or unsure where you truly belong, this story may surprise you. Stay with me until the end, because the real reason Americans love jeans is probably not what you think. I still remember that bright Saturday morning. The sky was perfectly blue, and my husband suggested we visit a local shopping center after breakfast. It sounded like an ordinary weekend. Our children were laughing in the back seat, talking about school and baseball practice, while soft country music played on the radio. Nothing seemed unusual. Yet sometimes the smallest moments quietly become the biggest turning points in life. As we walked into a clothing store, I noticed something that immediately caught my attention. Almost everyone was wearing jeans. Young couples, elderly grandparents, business owners, college students. Even a police officer shopping with his family wore dark blue jeans after work. I smiled and whispered to myself, do Americans ever get tired of wearing jeans? English learners, here is a simple sentence you can practice with me. Everyone was wearing jeans. Slowly. Everyone was wearing jeans. It is an easy sentence, but it helped me notice something much deeper than grammar. Curious, I asked a friendly saleswoman, why does everyone here love jeans so much? She laughed warmly, looked at me for a moment, and answered with a sentence I have never forgotten. Because jeans remind us that nobody has to pretend. I smiled politely, but inside I was confused. They were just pants. How could a piece of clothing carry such a powerful meaning? I kept thinking about her words while browsing through different colors and styles. My husband quietly picked up a pair and said, "You should try these." I almost refused. I had always chosen clothes that looked neat and safe. I worried about what people might think. I worried about looking too young, too casual, or simply different. But for some reason, I decided to try them on. When I looked into the mirror, I expected to see the same woman I had seen every morning for years. Instead, I saw someone smiling. Not because the jeans made me look thinner. Not because they were expensive. I smiled because, for the first time in a long while, I looked relaxed. My husband noticed it immediately. "There you are," he said softly. Those 3 simple words stayed with me all day. There you are. He did not say I looked beautiful. He did not compliment the jeans. He simply said he could finally see me again. That sentence touched my heart more deeply than I wanted to admit. Driving home, I watched people walking through parks, drinking coffee, pushing baby strollers, and laughing with friends. Everywhere I looked, I saw blue jeans. They suddenly felt less like fashion and more like a quiet language that everyone seemed to understand without speaking. That evening, while folding our new clothes, I discovered something unexpected inside the pocket of my new jeans. It was not a receipt. It was not a price tag. It was a tiny handwritten note. When I unfolded the paper and read the first line, my heart stopped for a second. And I had no idea that this little message was about to change everything I believed about freedom, love, and my own family. The note hidden inside my jeans. I almost threw the tiny piece of paper into the trash because I thought it was just another store reminder. Imagine if I had done that. I would never have discovered the sentence that quietly changed the way I looked at my husband, my children, and even myself. Sometimes the biggest lesson about freedom is hidden inside the smallest pocket. And what happened the next morning made me realize that the woman in the clothing store had been telling the truth all along. Jeans were never just jeans. I carefully unfolded the note while standing in my kitchen. The handwriting looked natural, almost as if someone had written it during a coffee break. There were only 2 short sentences. Be yourself. Someone already loves the real you. I stared at those words for several seconds. They were simple, but they felt strangely personal. I turned the paper over, expecting to find a company logo or a marketing message. There was nothing. Just those words in blue ink. My husband walked into the kitchen carrying 2 cups of coffee. He noticed the note in my hand and smiled before I even said anything. Interesting, isn't it? He asked. I nodded. Did you know it was there? I asked. He shook his head. No. But I like whoever wrote it. We laughed together, yet something inside me had already begun to change. That afternoon we visited my mother-in-law for our usual Sunday family lunch. As always, everyone gathered around the backyard picnic table. My father-in-law was grilling burgers. My nieces were chasing each other across the lawn. My son was throwing a baseball with his cousin. Then I noticed something I had completely ignored before. Almost every person at the gathering was wearing jeans. Different colors. Different styles. Different ages. Yet somehow everyone looked comfortable being exactly who they were. Nobody seemed interested in impressing anyone else. English learners, here is another easy sentence to practice. I felt comfortable. Slowly. I felt comfortable. It is a short sentence, but it describes a feeling that many English learners want to express naturally. My mother-in-law suddenly looked at me and smiled. Those jeans look perfect on you. I thanked her, expecting the conversation to end. Instead, she surprised me with a story I had never heard before. She pointed toward an old family photograph hanging inside the living room. In the picture, she and my father-in-law were standing together nearly 40 years earlier. They were both wearing blue jeans. We wore those on our first date, she said with a laugh. We couldn't afford fancy clothes, but we felt rich because we were together. Everyone around the table smiled. My husband squeezed my hand under the table without saying a word. For a moment, I realized that jeans were not about fashion at all. They carried memories. They connected generations. They reminded families that happiness did not need expensive things. As the afternoon became evening, my daughter climbed onto my lap and asked the sweetest question. "Mom, why do grown-ups smile so much when they talk about old jeans?" Before I could answer, my father-in-law quietly spoke from across the table. Because freedom isn't wearing whatever you want. Freedom is never being afraid to be yourself. The backyard suddenly became silent. Even the children stopped playing for a moment. His words sounded so simple, yet they stayed with me during the drive home. Later that night, while putting the groceries away, I reached into the same jeans pocket one more time. Just to make sure nothing else had been left behind. My fingers touched something small that definitely had not been there before. It wasn't another note. It was an old photograph folded into a tiny square, and the face smiling back at me made my heart race faster than ever. The old photograph nobody expected. Have you ever found an old photograph in the most impossible place and felt as if time had stopped for just 1 second? I honestly thought someone had made a mistake. But when I unfolded that tiny picture under my kitchen light, I realized it wasn't an accident at all. One smiling face, one faded pair of blue jeans, and one forgotten family memory were about to reveal why Americans don't simply wear jeans, they carry their stories inside them. What happened next made me see my own marriage through completely different eyes. I held the small photograph carefully between my fingers. It was slightly worn at the corners, as if someone had looked at it hundreds of times over many years. In the picture, a young couple stood beside an old pickup truck somewhere in the American countryside. Both of them were wearing blue jeans, white t-shirts, and huge smiles. Behind them, the evening sun painted the sky with warm orange colors. They looked genuinely happy, not because life was perfect, but because they looked perfectly comfortable with each other. I turned the picture over, expecting another clue. There were only 4 handwritten words, "Our first real freedom." I whispered the sentence aloud. Our first real freedom. English learners, this is a beautiful expression to practice. Freedom means being yourself. Slowly. Freedom means being yourself. Simple words often carry the deepest meaning. Just then my husband walked into the room and noticed the photograph in my hand. His smile disappeared for a brief moment, replaced by a look of surprise. "Where did you find that?" he asked softly. I pointed to the jeans folded on the kitchen chair. "Inside the pocket." He took a slow breath before laughing quietly. "I haven't seen that picture in years." I looked at him with curiosity. "Who are they?" Instead of answering immediately, he pulled out a chair and invited me to sit beside him. "That's my mom and dad," he finally said. "Their very first date." I stared at the young faces again. It was hard to imagine my cheerful in-laws looking so young and nervous. My husband continued speaking with a smile. "They always said those jeans reminded them that nobody cared how much money they had. They only cared about being together." Suddenly the note I had found earlier made much more sense. Be yourself. Someone already loves the real you. Those words suddenly felt like a family tradition instead of a random message. The next afternoon, I couldn't stop thinking about the story, so I visited my mother-in-law with the photograph in my purse. The moment she saw it, her eyes filled with tears, but they were happy tears. She laughed before I could even ask a question. I wondered where that picture disappeared. She gently held the photo and smiled. Your father-in-law always carried it in his wallet when we were young. One day he said he wanted our grandchildren to know that happiness isn't something you buy. Sometimes it's something you wear while building a life together. We spent the next hour looking through old family albums. Every important memory seemed to include blue jeans. Birthday parties. Camping trips. School graduations. Family road trips. Even anniversaries. I started noticing something fascinating. Nobody in those pictures looked worried about being perfect. They simply looked present. Connected. Happy. As I prepared to leave, my mother-in-law handed the photograph back to me with an unexpected smile. Keep it for now, she whispered. You'll understand why very soon. I frowned in confusion. What do you mean? She looked toward the living room window where my husband was playing catch with our son and answered with a sentence that sent chills down my spine. Because tomorrow, someone in this family is finally going to tell you the secret behind those jeans. And it isn't the story you've been believing. The secret behind the jeans. What if everything I believed about those blue jeans was only half the story? I thought the photograph had already revealed the biggest family secret. I was wrong. The next afternoon, one quiet conversation on an ordinary American front porch uncovered a truth so unexpected that I sat speechless for several minutes. It wasn't about fashion. It wasn't even about family tradition. It was about a promise made decades ago, one that was still quietly shaping the lives of everyone in our family, including mine. The following day, my father-in-law invited me to join him on the front porch while everyone else prepared dinner inside the house. The late afternoon sun covered the neighborhood with a soft golden light. Children rode bicycles along the sidewalk, neighbors waved as they walked their dogs, and the peaceful sound of wind moved gently through the trees. It felt like a perfectly ordinary American neighborhood, yet I had the strange feeling that I was about to hear something unforgettable. My father-in-law held an old coffee mug in one hand and looked down at the faded photograph resting on the small wooden table between us. After a long silence, he smiled. You know, he began, people always think these jeans brought your mother-in-law and me together. They didn't. I looked at him, surprised. They didn't? He shook his head slowly. No. They reminded us to stay together when life became difficult. His answer caught me completely off guard. He explained that during the first years of their marriage, money was often tight. They worked long hours, worried about paying bills, and sometimes wondered whether life would ever become easier. There were days when they disagreed, days when stress filled the house, and days when they questioned themselves. Yet every Friday evening, no matter how exhausted they felt, they changed into their old blue jeans and went for a simple walk around the neighborhood. No expensive restaurants. No luxury vacations. Just two people walking side by side, talking honestly about life. Those walks saved our marriage more than once, he admitted quietly. His words stayed in the air for a moment. It was about feeling safe enough to tell the truth to the person you loved. English learners, here is a useful sentence you can practice. We talked honestly. Slowly. We talked honestly. Honest conversations build strong relationships, and simple English can express powerful ideas. Later that evening, I couldn't stop thinking about what he had shared. After dinner, my husband and I decided to take our own walk through the neighborhood. We both happened to be wearing jeans without planning it. The cool evening air felt refreshing as families sat on their porches, children laughed in nearby yards, and the smell of fresh barbecue drifted through the streets. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then my husband broke the silence. Dad wasn't really talking about jeans today, he said. I smiled. I know. He looked at me and added, he was talking about choosing each other again and again. That sentence touched something deep inside me. Marriage wasn't built by dramatic moments. It was built by thousands of ordinary evenings, simple conversations, quiet forgiveness, and the decision to keep walking together even when life felt heavy. As we reached a small neighborhood park, we noticed an elderly couple sitting on a bench. They were holding hands, both wearing faded blue jeans. They laughed together as if they had known each other forever. My husband whispered, I hope we're still laughing like that someday. I squeezed his hand and smiled. At that exact moment, my phone vibrated. It was a message from my daughter, who was spending the evening at her cousin's house. The text was short, but it made my heart skip a beat. Mom. I found something in Grandpa's old closet. I think you need to see it right away. Suddenly, the peaceful evening no longer felt ordinary, because I had a feeling the biggest family secret was still waiting for us. The box hidden in the closet. Have you ever opened an old closet expecting dust and forgotten clothes, only to discover something that makes your entire family history feel different? My daughter's text stayed in my mind during the drive back to my in-laws' house. She almost never sounded nervous. But this time, she wrote only one sentence, Mom, I think Grandpa has been keeping a secret. I thought she was joking. I couldn't have been more wrong. When we arrived, my daughter was waiting near the hallway with wide eyes and an expression I had never seen before. She quietly led me upstairs to a small guest room. The closet door was open, and on the floor sat an old wooden box covered with years of dust. I found it while looking for extra blankets, she whispered. Grandpa said I could borrow anything from the closet, but I don't think he remembered this box was still here. My husband gently lifted the lid. Inside were neatly folded letters, faded photographs, ticket stubs from family road trips, and several pairs of old blue jeans, each carefully wrapped in soft white cloth. They looked ordinary, yet everyone in the room suddenly became very quiet. My father-in-law slowly walked into the room behind us. Instead of looking surprised, he smiled with peaceful acceptance. I wondered when someone would finally find that box, he said. We all turned toward him. He picked up one pair of worn jeans and carefully brushed away a little dust. Every pair tells the story of one important season in our family's life. I looked at him with curiosity. You kept every pair? He nodded. Not because they were valuable. Because they reminded us of who we were becoming. English learners, here is a simple sentence you can practice. Every memory matters. Slowly. Every memory matters. It is short, natural, and something people often say when talking about family. My father-in-law opened one folded letter and smiled. This was written after your husband was born. Then he opened another. This one came after we nearly lost our house during difficult financial times. Every object inside the box represented courage instead of success. There were no expensive watches, no jewelry, no luxury items. Just simple memories connected by ordinary blue jeans. My daughter picked up the smallest pair in the collection and laughed. Whose tiny jeans are these? Everyone smiled. My husband raised his hand. Mine. We all laughed together. Then my father-in-law looked at our children and spoke gently. You know why I kept these? They shook their heads. Because one day life will become difficult for all of you. And when that happens, I don't want you to remember what you owned. I want you to remember that this family always kept walking forward together. The room became completely silent. His words felt stronger than any speech I had ever heard. Later that evening, after everyone had gone downstairs, I stayed behind to help organize the box. While folding one old pair of jeans, I noticed something unusual stitched inside the waistband. It wasn't part of the original design. Someone had embroidered tiny words by hand using blue thread. I leaned closer until I could finally read them. Freedom grows where love stays. I smiled because the sentence perfectly described everything I had learned during the past few days. But before I could put the jeans back into the box, another small folded piece of paper slipped onto the floor. Unlike the others, this note wasn't old. The paper looked almost new. Across the front, someone had written only one sentence in careful handwriting. Please don't open this until the family dinner tomorrow. I looked toward the staircase, wondering who had placed it there, and why it seemed to be waiting specifically for me. The letter I was not supposed to read. What would you do if a letter had your name written all over it, but someone asked you not to open it until tomorrow? I carried that folded note home, and suddenly 24 hours felt longer than an entire year. Every time I looked at it, my imagination created a different story. Was it a family secret? A goodbye message? Or something that could change the future of our family forever? I promised myself I would wait. But that promise became harder every passing minute. The next morning, the letter was still resting on the kitchen table beside my coffee cup. I glanced at it while making breakfast for the children. My husband noticed me smiling at it every few minutes and laughed. You're thinking about that letter again, aren't you? I admitted that I was. He teased me by saying, maybe it's just Grandpa's old grocery list. We both laughed, but somehow neither of us truly believed that. There was something strangely important about the careful handwriting on the envelope. It didn't feel ordinary. Later that afternoon, we drove to my in-laws' house for our weekly family dinner. The neighborhood looked peaceful as always. Children were riding bicycles, neighbors were trimming their lawns, and American flags moved gently in the summer breeze. Everything looked completely normal, yet my heart kept beating a little faster because the unopened letter was sitting safely inside my handbag. During dinner, everyone seemed unusually cheerful. My mother-in-law served homemade apple pie while my father-in-law told funny stories about raising children years ago. Laughter filled the room. I almost forgot about the envelope until my daughter suddenly smiled and asked, "Mom, aren't you supposed to open something tonight?" Every conversation stopped immediately. My father-in-law nodded toward me with a gentle smile. "Go ahead." I carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a single handwritten page. At first, I expected a long family story, but instead I found only a few simple lines. "If you are reading this, it means you have already discovered our family tradition. Jeans were never the treasure. The people wearing them always were." I paused for a moment because those words immediately touched my heart. English learners, here is a beautiful sentence to practice. People are the real treasure. Slowly. People are the real treasure. It is easy to remember and carries a meaningful message. I continued reading. Every generation worries that life is changing too fast. Every generation thinks happiness is becoming harder to find. But happiness has always lived in the same place. Around the dinner table. During long walks. Inside honest conversations. And sometimes inside an old pair of blue jeans. By the time I finished reading, my eyes were beginning to fill with tears. My husband quietly reached for my hand under the table, just as he had done days earlier. No one spoke for several seconds. Finally, my father-in-law smiled and said, "That letter wasn't really written for you." I looked up in surprise. "It wasn't?" He shook his head. "I wrote it for whoever married into this family first. I hoped that person would understand what keeps this family strong." I felt deeply honored. It wasn't about being accepted because of where I came from or what I owned. It was about sharing the same values. Love. Honesty. Kindness. Responsibility. Freedom with compassion. After dinner, while everyone gathered in the backyard watching the children play, my son suddenly came running toward us carrying an old denim jacket. "Grandpa," he shouted excitedly. "Look what I found in the garage." My father-in-law froze for just a second before smiling in disbelief. "I haven't seen that jacket in over 30 years. He slowly took it into his hands, then reached into one of its inside pockets. His smile disappeared. Whatever he expected to find was gone. He looked directly at me and whispered, "Someone has already taken it. And if I'm right, tomorrow you'll finally understand why our family never throws away old denim." The missing piece of denim. Have you ever been told that something precious had disappeared years ago, only to discover that the real mystery had never been the missing object? That night, I couldn't stop thinking about my father-in-law's face when he looked inside the old denim jacket. He wasn't upset because something was gone. He looked emotional, almost relieved. I had a feeling that whatever had disappeared decades earlier was somehow connected to every story I had heard since buying that simple pair of jeans. The next chapter of our family's story was about to begin. The following morning, my husband suggested we visit a small local park before work. It was one of our favorite places in town. Families walked along peaceful trails, children fed ducks by the pond, and neighbors greeted each other with warm smiles. America often feels busy, but moments like these remind me why so many people treasure simple routines. As we walked beneath tall oak trees, I finally asked the question that had been filling my mind. What was Grandpa looking for inside that jacket? My husband smiled quietly before answering. A letter. I looked surprised. Another letter? He nodded. Yes. But this one was different. He explained that many years ago, before their children were grown, his father had written a promise to his future family. Instead of keeping it in a safe or a drawer, he had hidden it inside his favorite denim jacket because he believed that meaningful things should be discovered naturally, not announced dramatically. He forgot where he put it, my husband laughed. For years, everyone thought the letter had simply disappeared. I couldn't help smiling. The story sounded almost unbelievable, yet after everything that had happened recently, it somehow felt perfectly possible. English learners, here is a useful sentence to practice. Some things are worth waiting for. Slowly. Some things are worth waiting for. It is a natural expression that native speakers often use when talking about life and patience. As we continued walking, we noticed an elderly couple sitting together on a wooden bench. They were sharing one newspaper, laughing over the crossword puzzle, both dressed in comfortable blue jeans. My husband pointed toward them and whispered, "That's exactly what Dad admires. Not wealth. Not success. Just two people choosing each other every day." His words stayed with me long after we left the park. That evening, our children asked if we could organize old family photographs for a school history project. We spread albums across the living room floor. Picture after picture revealed birthdays, camping weekends, graduations, neighborhood barbecues, Thanksgiving dinners, and road trips across the United States. There was one surprising detail in almost every photograph. Blue denim. Sometimes jackets. Sometimes jeans. Sometimes tiny overalls for toddlers. It almost became a family joke. My daughter laughed. Did anyone in this family own different clothes? Everyone burst into laughter. My father-in-law smiled and answered, "Of course we did." But denim was never about fashion. It reminded us to live honestly. Just as he finished speaking, my son reached into the back cover of one old photo album. "What's this?" he asked. A folded envelope slowly slipped onto the carpet. The room became completely silent. My father-in-law stared at it without moving. "That," he whispered, "is impossible." He carefully opened the envelope with slightly trembling hands. Inside was the missing letter he had searched for all those years. No one spoke as he unfolded the faded paper. Then, instead of reading it himself, he looked directly at me with a gentle smile. "Would you read it aloud?" My heart raced as I accepted the letter. I unfolded the first page. But before I could read the opening sentence, I noticed there was something else hidden between the pages. It wasn't a photograph. It wasn't another note. It was a tiny, hand-drawn map with one location circled in blue ink. And every member of the family immediately recognized exactly where it led. The place marked in blue. What if a tiny hand-drawn map hidden inside an old family letter led not to money or treasure, but to the one place where your entire understanding of love could change forever? The moment I unfolded that faded piece of paper, everyone around the living room became silent. My father-in-law smiled through tears. My husband looked completely speechless. Even the children sensed that this was no ordinary family story anymore. The blue circle on that map pointed to one place, and somehow everyone knew exactly why it mattered. The next morning, we drove together to a quiet community park on the edge of town. It wasn't famous. There were no crowds, no tourist signs, and no expensive attractions. Just tall maple trees, wide open fields, a peaceful walking trail, and an old wooden bench overlooking a small lake. As soon as we parked the car, my father-in-law whispered, "This is where everything truly began." I looked around, trying to understand why such an ordinary place carried so much meaning. The children ran ahead, laughing as they chased squirrels across the grass, while my mother-in-law held my arm and smiled gently. 40 years ago, she said, we came here after our very first date. My father-in-law laughed. We had almost no money. We couldn't afford dinner at a fancy restaurant, so we bought 2 sandwiches, sat on that bench, and talked until sunset. He pointed toward the weathered bench near the lake. Surprisingly, it was still there. The wood had aged, but it remained standing as if it had been patiently waiting for this family reunion. We slowly walked over together. My husband squeezed my hand and quietly said, "This bench has probably heard more honest conversations than any expensive dining room ever could." English learners, here is a beautiful sentence to practice. Simple moments last forever. Slowly. Simple moments last forever. Native speakers often express deep feelings with short, simple sentences just like this one. My father-in-law finally unfolded the old letter and began reading it aloud. His voice was calm, but every word carried emotion. If one day our family becomes busy, stressed, or distracted by life, come back to this bench. Sit together. Wear your old jeans if you still have them. Talk honestly. Listen patiently. Remember that freedom isn't having everything you want. Freedom is having people who accept the real you. Nobody interrupted. Even the children became unusually quiet. A gentle breeze moved through the trees while ducks floated peacefully across the lake. It felt as if time itself had slowed down. Then something unexpected happened. My daughter looked at us and smiled. "Can we make this our family tradition too?" My husband answered immediately. "Absolutely." We all sat together on the old bench, talking about dreams, fears, funny memories, and hopes for the future. Nobody looked at a phone. Nobody hurried home. For nearly 2 hours, we simply enjoyed being together. At that moment, I finally understood why Americans often seem comfortable wearing jeans almost everywhere. It wasn't because denim was fashionable. It symbolized something much deeper. It reminded people that life's greatest moments usually happen when nobody is trying to impress anyone else. As the sun slowly began setting behind the trees, I noticed a small metal plaque attached beneath the bench. I leaned down to read it. The engraving was almost hidden by age. It read, "Dedicated to families who choose love every single day." I smiled, believing that was the final surprise. Then my son reached underneath the bench and pulled out a small glass jar sealed with a blue lid. Inside were dozens of folded notes written by strangers over many years. On top of the jar was a handwritten message that made my heart race once again. Take one. Leave one. Continue the story. I looked at my family, realizing our journey wasn't ending here. It was asking us to write the next chapter ourselves. The note that changed my heart. What if the most valuable message you will ever read wasn't written by someone famous, but by a complete stranger who simply wanted another family to stay together? When I opened the little glass jar beneath that old park bench, I expected funny memories or simple greetings. Instead, I found words so honest that everyone around me became silent. One folded note after another revealed a truth that no school, no book, and no expensive gift had ever taught me. And then I discovered one message that felt as if it had been waiting specifically for me. I carefully reached into the glass jar and pulled out the first folded piece of paper. The handwriting belonged to someone I would probably never meet. It simply said, "We almost gave up. We chose one more conversation instead." I smiled quietly before passing it to my husband. Without saying a word, he nodded as if he completely understood. My daughter opened another note. Our happiest memories were always free. My son unfolded one that made everyone laugh. Blue jeans survive almost everything. Just like good families. Even my father-in-law laughed so hard that tears filled his eyes. One by one, every message carried the same gentle theme. Kindness. Forgiveness. Patience. Honest conversations. They came from different people, different handwriting, different years, yet somehow they all pointed toward the same destination. It suddenly felt as though hundreds of families had quietly left pieces of hope for strangers they would never meet. English learners, here is another useful sentence to practice. Kind words stay forever. Slowly. Kind words stay forever. It is simple English, but native speakers often express powerful emotions with sentences just like this. Then I unfolded one final note resting at the bottom of the jar. Unlike the others, it was written with blue ink that had only faded slightly. Across the top, someone had written, "To the woman who finds this." My heart immediately beat faster. It couldn't possibly have been written for me, yet the words felt strangely personal. I continued reading. If you are wondering whether small moments matter, the answer is yes. Years from now, your children will not remember every gift you bought. They will remember how safe they felt sitting beside you. I paused because my eyes suddenly filled with tears. My husband gently squeezed my hand. I kept reading aloud. Wear the comfortable jeans. Take the slow walk. Eat dessert together. Laugh often. Put the phone away. Listen carefully. The ordinary days will quietly become the unforgettable ones. Nobody spoke. Even the birds around the lake seemed to disappear into the silence. Finally, my mother-in-law smiled and whispered, "That's exactly how we've tried to live." I looked around at my family sitting together beneath the trees. Nobody was pretending to be perfect. Nobody cared about expensive clothes or impressive achievements. We were simply enjoying one peaceful afternoon together. For the first time, I completely understood why blue jeans had become such a meaningful symbol in this family. They represented comfort instead of status, authenticity instead of appearance, love instead of perfection. Before leaving the park, my daughter asked if we should add our own message to the jar. Everyone immediately agreed. We spent several minutes thinking about what we wanted to leave for the next stranger who might someday sit on this same bench. Finally, I wrote one simple sentence. Be yourself. Your family needs the real you. I carefully folded the paper and placed it inside the jar. As I closed the lid, my father-in-law quietly smiled. Now you're part of the tradition. We all began walking back toward the parking lot, believing our beautiful family story had finally reached its ending. But just before we reached the car, my husband stopped, looked toward the old bench one last time, and softly said something that completely changed the way I would tell this story forever, and it became the perfect ending I never saw coming. Why Americans love jeans. What if the biggest answer to my question had been quietly following me from the very first moment I walked into that clothing store? I thought I was making a video about blue jeans. Instead, I discovered a story about love that grows stronger through ordinary days, a marriage built on honest conversations, children who learn by watching instead of listening, and a family tradition hidden inside faded denim. The greatest surprise was this: the secret was never inside the jeans. The secret was always inside the people brave enough to wear them without pretending to be someone else. As we slowly walked away from the old park bench, my husband looked back one final time before opening the car door. He smiled and said, "Maybe Grandpa never wanted us to find a treasure. Maybe he wanted us to become one." Those words stayed in my mind during the entire drive home. The evening sunlight reflected across the windshield. The children were quietly talking in the back seat, and for the first time in many years, I wasn't thinking about tomorrow's schedule, unfinished chores, or the endless list of responsibilities waiting at home. I was thinking about something much simpler. Presence. The gift of truly being with the people you love. That night, before putting away my new blue jeans, I slipped my hand into the pocket one last time. It was empty now, yet somehow it felt fuller than ever. I smiled because I realized the notes, photographs, letters, and memories had already found a new place to live. They were no longer hidden inside denim. They were becoming part of our family's future. The following weekend, without anyone suggesting it, every member of our family arrived at dinner wearing blue jeans. We laughed the moment we noticed it. Nobody had planned it. It simply happened. My father-in-law looked around the table with proud eyes and quietly whispered, "The tradition continues." English learners, here is one final sentence to practice. Love grows in simple moments. Slowly. Love grows in simple moments. Short sentences like this are common in everyday English, and they often carry the deepest emotions. Researchers in family psychology have long suggested that strong relationships are built less by extraordinary events and more by consistent, positive daily interactions. Shared meals, regular conversations, laughter, and simple routines help strengthen trust, emotional security, and lasting family bonds. Looking around our dinner table, I didn't need statistics to believe it. I could see the evidence smiling back at me. My daughter reached for another slice of pie. My son laughed at one of Grandpa's old jokes for the 100th time. My husband gently held my hand beneath the table exactly as he had done throughout this journey. Those tiny moments were quietly becoming the memories our children would carry into their own futures. Suddenly, my daughter looked at me and asked, "Hey, Mom, when I'm older, do you think I'll tell my children this story too?" I smiled without hesitation. "I hope you don't tell them exactly the same story." She looked confused. I continued softly, "I hope you create your own." Everyone around the table nodded. Every family deserves traditions that reflect their own love, kindness, and courage. Before leaving that evening, I folded the little handwritten note that had started everything. Be yourself. Someone already loves the real you. Instead of putting it back into my jeans, I placed it inside our family photo album, where future generations might someday discover it just as unexpectedly as I had. Maybe they'll smile. Maybe they'll laugh. Maybe they'll understand that freedom isn't found in expensive things, perfect lives, or flawless appearances. Maybe they'll discover what I finally learned. Americans don't love jeans simply because they are comfortable. They love what jeans quietly remind them to protect: authenticity, resilience, equality, and the freedom to be completely themselves with the people they love most. And perhaps, wherever you are listening today, your own favorite pair of jeans is already holding a beautiful story that is still waiting to be written. That's all for today. I'll create many more stories like this in the future. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next one.